Hey, I'm Dr. Timothy Sloan, and I want to welcome you back to another episode of Keep Standing. Listen, I want you to make sure that you like, subscribe, and share this content if it's being beneficial to you, which I know it will. Make sure you're telling others about Keep Standing. Let's spread the word. Well, today I am really, really excited to welcome to the show one of my good friends and somebody who I believe is a premier leader in the nation. Pastor Mike Walrond. He is literally a cultural architect. He's the pastor of the First Corinthian Baptist Church in Harlem, New York. He's a social advocate and someone whose voice is literally changing the world. So, and by the way, he just happens to be my Morehouse brother. So, welcome to the show, Pastor Mike Walrond. Mike, man, just for others who may not know the depth of what you're doing in Harlem, tell us a little bit about some of the work.
Oh, yeah. I think, well, I've been in Harlem now for 20 plus years at FCBC. That's what we call First Corinthian Baptist Church. Prior to that, I was serving as senior pastor of a church in Durham, North Carolina. So this is now in my 29th year as a senior pastor. And I've been at FCBC 20 years. What we've seen God do at that place, in that space in Harlem, has been unbelievable. The growth, the impact points. Two of the things I'm most proud of, in addition to the work we do within the congregation itself, are our other footprints in Harlem, our Dream Center and our Hope Center. Our Dream Center we opened in 2012 in response to what was a crisis in many ways with some of the schools in our community. They were being what they call co-located, district schools being in the same building with charter schools. When that happened in our community, many of the district schools lost programming, extracurricular programming, things like music. They lost phys ed. And so we started creating programs around creative arts, leadership development, economic empowerment, and technology for young people, all free. So Dream Center has been doing that for 13 years now. In the 12 plus years, 17,000 people come through the Dream Center and take programs, and we've created over 600 free programs in the 12 years. So we can actually see and measure the impact. And then in 2016, we opened the Hope Center, which offers free mental health care in our community. And in those years, we've been able to offer over 35,000 hours of free mental health care, to the tune of about 3,400 people a year we see. And that is all free as well. There are many things we do, but those two things that we started through the church in response to need have been two of the things we've been most proud of at the church.
Well, I've been to FCBC, and if you have not been to FCBC, you have to go. It is one of the most electrifying places that you'll ever visit, and really is a true representation of the church working together. So you talked a little bit about mental health, and this is something that we share passion for, and that you are, I mean, a lot of your work is really steeped into this. Let's talk about why focusing on mental health is so important for leaders, faith leaders, and just leaders in particular.
I think faith leaders and leaders in particular is important because I'll talk about faith leaders. This is what we do. Yeah. You know, you've gone through seminary, I've gone through seminary, you've been a pastor for 20 years as I. But when we were in our younger days in ministry, getting into ministry, learning the ropes, so to speak, we very rarely heard conversations around self-care. The idea is that some of our effectiveness, our efficiency, our quote unquote successes are based on what we produce, whether the church grows, programs grow. And in doing so, sometimes we have a tendency to just go. Because when you reduce your impact to what you produce, first of all, and not to belabor it, that's a capitalistic idea. The notion that you are synonymous with your productivity, right? Your self-worth is synonymous with your productivity. And so like many of us, we get into a church and we work, become workaholics. We grind because we want to be quote unquote successful, right? Yeah. But we don't always think about what is lost in the midst of that. The amount of clergy, for example, who suffer with serious ailments, high blood pressure, diabetes, hypertension. I remember many years ago, Duke University did a study on clergy and found that some of the highest suicide rates were among clergy leading congregations. And there are many reasons for that. But part of it is that we don't talk about self-care. And the way people view us in the church as the leaders, we are the persons that everyone comes to in crisis, when there's conflict, when there's problems, when the church needs direction. And very rarely are there people who are checking in on us, because the assumption is, well, that's the man or woman of God. They're fine. They're prayed up. But we don't always understand the kind of psychic fractures we experience, the psychic wounds we experience. Because although we are the pastors of churches and congregations, that's just our assignment. It's not really who we are. And it does not negate our humanity and who we are, because I started pastoring at 25 years old. At 25 years old, I can tell you, I didn't fully know myself. And I was 25 years old, a young pastor, a young husband, and a young father. By the time I started pastoring at 25, I had been married for 3 years and had 2 children, and still trying to navigate my own identity issues. And in the midst of that, again, if you're not told that you are enough, just being a human being, that you wake up enough, you wake up worthy, you start thinking that your worth and your value is synonymous with your output. So I think pastors and leaders in general need to be mindful of self-care, mindful of being self-aware. Because self-care doesn't necessarily mean you've made a commitment to be self-aware. Self-awareness is connected to what I call, well, my pastor, Bill Jones, who you knew, would say we have to engage in introspective retrospection. In other words, we have to be able to look within and then look back over our lives and be able to make honest assessments of ourselves. Because the hardest thing to do, I think, for many human beings is to be honest with who we are.
Yeah. And, when we talk about, the mental health and making it a priority, it's, it requires so much vulnerability. So we don't always do it. And then I think that, also the taboo, kind of area around this conversation, making it so taboo that we don't talk about it nearly enough. But you've talked openly about even suicidal ideations in your ministry early on. What was that turning point for you that led you to seek help, and then how did it kind of reshape everything you do in ministry?
I experienced a suicidal ideation in 2011, fall of 2011. And I was very open about that when we began this journey at the church with regard to mental health. Part of it was, you've known me for a long time. You know my health challenges. I was born with a very rare disease called common variable immunodeficiency that wasn't fully diagnosed until my 40s. But what it basically meant is that I was born with no antibodies, that I don't really have a full immune system. And it's a disease that often goes unnoticed. What happens is the life expectancy of someone with CVID without treatment is maybe late teens, early 20s. So what happens is you find people who are dying young from infections, not understanding why. So all my life, I've probably been hospitalized over 22, 23 times. I've fought sepsis 3 times in my life. Now, surviving sepsis alone once is amazing, but 3 times, and 2 of the times I had it was the worst bacteria that could get in your blood is MRSA. And I survived it with no immune system. But you have to understand, being sick all the time, hospitalized, going to emergency rooms. There have been countless times in the 29 years as a pastor, I would preach on Sunday and immediately after service be at the emergency room. Or during the week, hospitalized for 2, 3, 4 days. And in my younger days, instead of saying, you know what, let me take the next week off, I'm right back to work, fresh out of the hospital. But being sick all the time and battling that caused depression. I didn't know what was happening. I was in deep, chronic depression for years, just thinking I was tired, just thinking I was overwhelmed by the work. And one day it came to a head when I was in Seattle, Washington, and I checked into this hotel. I'll never forget the day. It was on the 22nd floor. And to me, it was my first time in Seattle. I thought the air was just crisper in Seattle, and I was taking deep breaths. Every time I went outside, it was just nice. It was a nice little coolness to it. Well, anyway, I check into the hotel, and it had a balcony with a view of downtown Seattle. I go out on the balcony, 22nd floor, standing there just gazing at the view. And literally, Pastor Tim, I heard a voice that said to me, and this is what it said: you know, if you jump, you can survive. 3 times I heard that. If you jump, you can survive. As clear as you and I are talking right now. In that moment that I heard that, a chill came over me, but then I felt a force compelling me back into the room. I go back in, I fall on the ground. I cannot tell you how many hours I was on that ground, almost in fetal position, crying. And I was terrified. I had never experienced anything like that in my life. I literally heard a voice speak to me, tell me that if I jumped, I would survive. That trip took a turn. I wasn't there to preach. I was actually there at the behest of a former professor of mine to come give a lecture. And those 3 or 4 days, I felt tormented. I did not know what was going on. I didn't want to go near the balcony, near the windows. Everything was frightening me because I had an experience I never had before. But I remember on the plane ride back to New York, I realized what had happened. And many things happened in that long plane ride. One, I developed a different kind of sympathy for people who engage in that act. In mental health world, we don't like to say commit suicide. It makes it sound like a legal criminal term, but who decide to take their lives or decide to end their lives. And I had a different kind of sympathy because here I was mentally strong and I considered myself intellectual and all that. And yet in that moment, I heard that voice. Something compelled me back into the room. And I thought on that plane ride back, how many people didn't feel that same compulsion. And in that moment of vulnerability, in that unguarded moment, jumped. And then what happens is, if that would have been my narrative, yourself, countless people who knew me, friends, family would have said things like, I had no idea. I don't know why that happened. Why did Michael do that? I had no idea he was going through this. Because we don't talk about it. We suffer in silence. And so for me, the entrance into this field was because of my personal experience. And when I came back, the head of our communications team at the church used to often talk about her therapist. I never really paid attention to it. And I asked her one day, I said, would you mind giving me the number to your therapist? And she said, yeah. And she said, why? And I said, I think I need to talk to somebody. It was a very vulnerable moment for me. But I knew I needed help. And that therapist that I called, I got the nerve to call 2 months later in 2012, is still my therapist to this day. 13 years.
I started doing therapy work in seminary because it was so challenging, and I realized I needed somebody to talk to. And then I started. I mean, they spend that entire time, but it was proactive, and people think sometimes it just has to be in crisis. I think you have to have someone to talk to, and so luckily I kind of developed that pattern. Once I got into ministry, but I believe in it. I'm committed to therapy and doing that type of introspective work. But a lot of people still struggle with it, and then they say, you hear this stuff. Oh, just have faith, just trust in the Lord. You be all right. Pray through it. But that is such a misconception about it. When you hear people say, if you do therapy, you got a lack of faith. How do you respond to that?
Well, 2 things I'll share in response. One, I had this question posed to me in another interview. And I remember asking the interviewer if they had any medical issues. The person doing the interview said to me that they battled with high blood pressure and diabetes at the time. And I said, what is the treatment plan? What is your care? Well, they talked about the medications, that with the diabetes, they weren't at the point they needed insulin shots, but they were still taking pills, and high blood pressure, hypertension, they were on medication for that. I said, so you're telling me that you don't trust God? The person said, what do you mean? I said, because asking someone who goes to a therapist or sees a therapist and asks, does that mean a lack of faith? Well, I can flip that. If you go to a doctor because of high blood pressure, you don't trust God to heal it. If you go to a doctor because of diabetes, you mean you don't trust God to heal it? So when it comes to the physical ailments, you don't see any discrepancy between being a person of faith and going to the doctor. In fact, we would critique the person who suffered physical or health ailments and didn't go see a doctor. But when it comes to one's psychological care, to one's mental health, all of a sudden the issue of faith comes up. Well, no, to me that is ridiculous. That if I don't question someone who goes to a doctor when they're sick physically, why would I challenge someone who goes to a doctor because they don't feel well mentally or psychologically? So our task is to normalize the conversation, to demythologize and destigmatize the narratives around mental health so that people understand that going to see a therapist or attend to your mental health needs does not mean you're crazy, does not mean that something is wrong with you. It means that you're intentional about your well-being, the same way you would go for a yearly physical or screenings for prostate cancer or breast cancer, that you are intentional. So for me, telling people that to see a therapist and to be a person of faith is not contradictory makes sense. So I think that the more we normalize the conversation in churches, the more pastors talk about it, the more we preach about it. I've preached about my issues. The more we preach about it and say it's okay, and then have the resources available for the community, then things happen. That's one. Two, very quickly, when Robin Williams died, it hit me. Now, I was a fan of Robin Williams, his comedy, his genius. And when he ended his life by suicide, it hit me. It hit me not because of the act, but because I read an article by one of his closest friends that wrote about him. And in the article, he talked about Robin Williams' life and his internal struggle and turmoil. But there was a line in the end of this article that when I read it, Pastor Tim, I burst into tears. He said that for years, Robin Williams had helped other people. He had helped heal other people because of his comedic genius. And here's the line. He said, but Robin Williams had no Robin Williams to heal his psychic wounds. And I just burst into tears. Why? Because as a pastor, I felt that. I felt that. Who do we go to when we feel the fracturing, the rupturing? When people come to us all the time, where do we go? And sometimes we fall into the myth of invincibility and feel like I'm the pastor. I got to have the answers. I got to be able to heal myself. No.
Nonsense.
No, it is nonsense. So I think that's the response to people, that we can't be critical of people who care about their well-being mentally, and that we have to normalize the conversation from the pulpit.
Man, so let's stay there and let's circle the block. I believe it was Robin Williams who said, "Everyone is fighting a battle that we know nothing about."
That's right.
And I found this out in, I think it was 2013 or 14, where we had gone through this major struggle, and I was dealing with depression that nobody knew. Preaching 3 times a Sunday, and shake hands, run out the back door, go home, get into bed, and nobody knew because they weren't really checking.
Yeah.
And then we can kind of wear the mask,
Of course.
and we become good at it. But the Sunday I decided to say it out loud, and I don't know that I had it intentionally planned, but I told the congregation what I was struggling with, and it unleashed something in people saying, if you are willing to be vulnerable, then I can say me too.
Yeah.
And I think that is so critical when we're willing to sit behind mics or in pulpits or in boardrooms and say, listen, here's what I struggle with. So when you got a leader who comes and they say, Pastor Mike, I'm a little hesitant about, this whole therapy thing, and I'm a pastor, I'm a leader, what do you say to them?
Yeah, I really challenge them to expand their definition of what it means to engage in self-care. See, we think self-care, when we hear self-care, we think, well, we're going to go to the spa or go on vacation. Well, no, it's not just that. It is learning things that I put into practice that I actually got questioned by some of our colleagues, right? Mm-hmm. So I was doing things like yoga and Buddhist meditation. I had someone pouring into me about that. And so meditation became part of my regular daily engagement of self-care. And then also once I started doing it and became a practitioner, then I started teaching it at the church. Man, let me tell you what through some people that we started doing at one point after Sunday service. We and you'd been to the church, so our pulpit is not a traditional pulpit. Right. It's a performance stage. We cleared the stage. On Sundays after church, we had yoga instructors coming in doing yoga on the stage with members, doing meditation, doing breath. We brought in a person who for years, still to this day, does breath work meditation. All those things that really impacted me. My thing is, if it had an impact on me, let's spread the wealth. Let's make sure that people have access to that. So I tell leaders that you have to have a regimen, not just of what you do for yourself physically, but what you do for yourself mentally, emotionally. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, for example, I preached for you this past Sunday, and I've been here for the past couple of years. Those beads I wear are mala prayer beads that I have on. Right.
I was meaning to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those are prayer beads. And the idea is that you create these mantras, and you have mantras, and I have several that I speak to myself that are mantras that are actually words of affirmation that have become part of the words of affirmation at FCBC. One of the affirmations we say is that I'm the beloved of God. God's spirit rests on me, and in me, God finds favor. That comes from the baptism of Jesus, right? I am the beloved of God. God's spirit rests on me, and in me, God finds favor. And then when you sit with those beads, and I don't usually wear them around my neck when I meditate, each bead represents a repetition of the mantra. And the idea is to go through the entire beads and sit with that. So if you sit with that for your mantra, you'll find yourself sitting there in a posture of prayer and meditation for 45 minutes will pass. You don't even realize it, right? And at first I started, Tim, it was hard, right? 5 minutes here, and then your mind start wandering. 7 minutes. Now I can sit for 45 minutes to an hour in meditation, and it calms me. It reduces my blood, my stress levels. It helps me with my high blood pressure. I mean, all those things. And because I have a lot of health challenges, it reduces anxiety, right? So I encourage people to find practices. And hear this, studying Zen meditation does not mean you're less of a believer, because what shapes my language, what shapes my affirmations is my belief in God and my being a disciple of the carpenter. So for me, it is helpful. And that's what I try to encourage other leaders to do, and not think it's taboo, as you said, or all of a sudden, oh, you're not really saved. You're not really a believer if you incorporate other practices. In my life, in my journey in dealing with people of various religions, tragically, Christians are the most intolerant of openness to learning from other faiths and learning practices that not make you question your faith, but have all enhanced my faith and deepened my resolve as a follower of the teachings of Jesus.
Yeah. You know, there's so many, I think, ways that we can kind of work on strengthening our mental health, but paying attention to it is really, I think, critical. Yeah. So we talk about the work that you're doing at FCBC, and it's simply phenomenal. But what are some of the things, because y'all do things differently, and you're not afraid. Yeah. FCBC is not afraid to push the envelope, and then you do it, and everybody else is like, oh.
It's something to do. Man, well, I've gotten that over the years. Like, we'll do initiatives, or I'll take approaches, and people are like, oh, what is Mike doing? And then a few years later, it's like, why didn't we do it, right? And when I realized, and this is real, my language is intentional. So you know me, man. Theologically, I'm always pushing the envelope, but I'm a Christian, but I probably don't use that language as much. That doesn't mean I'm not. What I do say very often is that I am a disciple of the teachings of the carpenter, or a disciple of the teachings of Jesus. Well, where does that come from? It's biblical. Jesus said, go make disciples, not build churches, not build cathedrals, make disciples. And so it's one thing to say, I'm a member of FCBC. I'm a member of the Luke. Well, what I've discovered is you can have people who are members of the Luke and members of FCBC. The question is, are you a disciple of the teachings, right? Because to be a member of FCBC or the Luke means you have the capacity to be repetitive about showing up. But to be a disciple means you've made an intentional commitment to order your life a particular way. So when you hear of things like Jesus praying, or the scriptures in book of Joshua, God telling Joshua, meditate on the word day and night. Meditation and prayer and reflection and stealing away is all part of the practices. So what I've just realized, that as a disciple of Jesus, I can't say I want to be a disciple of Jesus and not be prepared to experience what Jesus experienced. That means that when you feel a deep conviction about the direction of your faith, or the direction of your leadership, expect there to be challenge. Expect there to be confrontation. Expect people not to understand you, not to really see what you're doing, to question and ridicule. And your responsibility is to maintain your commitment to the conviction in the midst of the challenges, in the midst of people not seeing it. I remember when I first started pastoring, my pastor at the time gave me the greatest bit of advice. He said that if God has given you a vision, he said, and you know God has given you a vision, not something you've concocted for yourself or some good idea you had, but it is a God-given vision. He said, never be distressed when people, leaders in the church say, Pastor, I just don't get what you're saying. I can't get behind that vision. He said, because if they could do it, there would be no need for you. So your presence is not just to preach on Sunday, teach during the week. There's a title that sometimes we abandon for the sake of safety, and that's visionary. That is one of the biggest titles we hold. And many of us abandon it or forfeit it for fear of backlash or ridicule or even losing our positions. But if you're a visionary and you trust in God and you're following the vision, anticipate backlash, and then anticipate that God's presence will guarantee the impact. I didn't say success.
Right.
The impact, because success in this culture is a fickle thing.
Yeah.
And I tell a lot of young pastors who call me or who are going into ministry, I tell them the same thing, which is two things. One, don't seek to be impressive. Seek to be impactful.
Yeah.
Two, do not tie your ego to your assignment. Because if you let your ego be synonymous with your assignment, you won't know when to walk away.
Yeah.
Because you'll try to make something. You won't know when to stop because you feel that I got to make it work, and make it work. And what if the thing you're trying to make work is not part of the necessary vision for the space or the house you've been called to lead?
Wow.
So.
Well, listen, we talk about how different things are today than in our generation and some of the stuff we were dealing with. And so, when you got young leaders coming up, they don't know, what's up here ahead.
Yeah.
What would you say to that young leader, coming up and the importance about focusing on your mental health? Because it may not be at the forefront.
Yeah, it probably won't be for the most part until some crisis hits. So it's twofold. One, I would say always do a self-inventory, right? You need to check in with yourself, and checking in, be honest. How do I feel right now? We're not taught that. How do I feel about how things are going? How do I feel about myself? I think those are the kind of conversations that we can have with ourselves, but I think we have to be guided in those, as you said, by someone, whether it's a mentor or even a therapist. But there are three things that have shaped the work that I do that feed into my mental well-being. Here are the three things I leave with any young leader, young pastor. One, always have a passion for the possible. A passion for the possible. Always be passionate about possibility, about the things that abound for your work, for your assignment, and for yourself. Don't let your passion and your greatest passion just be for your productivity as a leader, right? Let it be passion for yourself. What is possible in my life? Make sure that the healing you preach about is a possibility for you as well. The restoration you talk about is a possibility for you as well. So one, a passion for the possible. Two, a commitment to creativity. a commitment to creativity. Our culture right now, with all the political insanity, we do not lack intelligent people. We do lack people with imagination, right? So you have to have an imagination for the work you do and an imagination for yourself. Don't be so boxed in, so closed in, and don't be so consumed with success that you don't take a chance and you fall into the trap of mimicking, right? Or imitating other things. What may work for Timothy Sloan in Texas may not work for Michael Walrond in Harlem, and vice versa. So I have to be attentive to the needs of my community so that my imagination is flowing for what I see in the current setting. And then lastly, I think for yourself and for the ministry and for the assignment and for the work, no matter who you are, a hunger for healing. You have to want to see healing manifest in your assignment for the places you serve and for yourself. You can't really be impactful if you're not concerned with the well-being of the people you serve. So a passion for the possible, a commitment to creativity, and a hunger for healing.
Wow. Man, so rich, and I think so important for any young leader. Pay attention to what you've heard today. I think it'll be incredibly beneficial as you navigate the landscape in front of you. Man, I'm grateful. Listen, you wrote an incredible book, and we have it. Our church has it. Tell us a little bit about that and how they can find it, and then how they can find you also.
Yeah. The book I wrote was entitled Searching for Agabus. The subtitle was Embracing Authenticity and Finding Your Way to You. In part of what our conversation was, I think we live in an age where we, and I said this on Sunday, where we reward pretentiousness and we scoff at authenticity. And so searching for Agabus, and I use the prophet Agabus in a very intentional way in the book. I think searching for Agabus was a kind of nuanced critique of social media at the same time, because again, we're so busy trying to please people and build likes and following that sometimes we contort ourselves to fit into spaces that we may not have been born to be in, or are actually beneath our standard of being. But because we want people to like us and we want to build a following, we post for praise and we go looking for likes. So search for Agabus, embracing authenticity, is really about that. Learning how to embrace your own authenticity and find your way back to yourself. You can get that book anywhere they sell books, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, you can order it, but Searching for Agabus. And then if you want to check out what we're doing, First Corinthian Baptist Church is fcbcnyc.org. And then with the Dream Center, dreamcenterharlem.org, and the Hope Center is hopecenterharlem.org. Those are the three spaces you can see the work we're doing.
And they can find you at?
They can same. Look, I haven't yet graduated to the place where I have my own website, but you can find me on Instagram at Mike Walrond, at MikeWalrond, and you'll find me on Instagram.
Yeah, man, I'm incredibly grateful for you. Thank you so much. We've been friends for a long time, dating back to our time as students at Morehouse College, and you can't say enough about that incredible place and what it meant to our lives today in leadership. Thanks so much to each of you. Thanks for joining us again for another episode of Keep Standing. Listen, do us a favor. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and share this conversation with others. I know it'll be a benefit to a lot of people connected to you. Hope to see you again next time. Until then, keep standing.